Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Storytelling Advisor here, analyzing stories from every medium to see what worked, what didn't, and what could be improved. I hope you all enjoyed the last episode because this next Operation CWAL can't wait any longer. You already know the drill on getting more storytelling content. Like, subscribe, and show me the money! Comment your thoughts below. Let's go! Alrighty, for today's episode, we're going back to a long time ago, 1996 to be exact, to a galaxy, well, not that far away. Many people now associate this story with serious e-gaming or LAN parties stocked with Doritos and Mountain Dew, but I almost never hear anyone discuss the fascinating campaign side of the game. And quite frankly, it was one of my favorite stories growing up, even if I struggled to keep the power overwhelming me from ruining the whole experience. So, here's some food for thought on StarCraft and why it was such an interesting story. Again, we're not here for the history, but I'll quickly bring all you noobs up to speed. Created by Chris Metzen and James Finney, Blizzard Entertainment developed its first iteration of StarCraft in 1996 using the same game engine as Warcraft II: Tides of Darkness, a title they'd released the year prior. This initial version was poorly received as many saw it as Warcraft in space without much differentiating the gameplay from its fantasy-based predecessor. There were some elements that worked though, like the 3 playable races that survived when the team took the project back to the drawing board. After some strategic delays, like Blizzard pushing back deadlines in favor of polishing their product, the final game was released in March of 1998, and the rest is history. On the surface, the story of StarCraft might not seem that unique or impressive, but once you get into the game, it's actually really cool to see how the journey unfolds. The whole storyline spans several sequels and mediums, but we're going to stick to the OG game because that's where the magic began. I know the overarching plot gets really juicy in subsequent games, but for the sake of time, and believe me, I could go on and on about this one, we have to keep it to the first StarCraft. Since this is science fiction, I have to give you a bit on the setting before we jump into the plot. The game begins in the year 2499 and is set in the fictional Koprulu sector of the Milky Way. We're here because centuries before the game began, certain humans, like criminals and mutants, were exiled from Earth due to overpopulation. These humans were meant to colonize another part of the galaxy, but their systems malfunctioned on their journey, stranding them in the Koprulu sector, which they've been colonizing ever since. There's a lot more backstory, like politics, prejudices, injustices, but I don't want to give too much of the game away in case anyone decides to pick it up themselves. Okay, setting covered. Now on to the 3 races you play throughout the story. First, we have the Terrans, who are essentially humans, though some have psychic abilities that come into play for the story. With their advanced technology, advanced by our standards, they've managed to establish enough stability to create livable societies. This would be all fine and dandy if it weren't for the other 2 warring alien races, the insectoid Zerg, whose goal is to assimilate every other race through infestation and mutation, and the ancient Protoss, whose intelligence and advancements far exceed both the Zerg and the Terran, though their beef is mainly just with the Zerg. Essentially, this is a war between the Zerg and the Protoss, with the Terrans caught in the middle by accident. There is a 4th race, the Xel'Naga, but I'm not going to talk about them. Though they're pretty integral to the StarCraft lore, they're only mentioned briefly as plot points in the first game. To cover the whole picture, this video would go on for hours, and no one has time for that. Maybe I'll do the expansions and sequels in a future analysis. Who knows? What's really cool about StarCraft is that it's a space opera told through 3 different perspectives. War has always been fascinating to me because, like any conflict, there are at least 2 sides who believe they're in the right. StarCraft gives you in-depth knowledge on each race, like why they're fighting, their strategies, and the strife within their own communities, all while advancing a story that connects everyone. It's not simply, bugs are bad, let's kill them all. No. There's a lot more nuance because you end up playing as the main antagonist and get to see how important they are for the story. It also really helps that the Zerg are, in my opinion, by far the most fun to play. I mean, just look at them. The gooey, gross structures, the veiny, dripping artwork, the primitive yet devastating powers. They're just so cool. I know Protoss is all highbrow and sophisticated, but man, the Zerg really have some neat soldiers. I remember the first time I saw an Ultralisk and I thought, yes, this is perfection. Anyway, sorry, digression. Back to the story. The game is broken into 3 acts. First, the Terran campaign, then the Zerg campaign, and finally the Protoss campaign. Now, you don't get to make any decisions about the plot, and it's all predetermined: who gets betrayed, who dies, who lives, who gets resurrected. The player's real control is what they do during the actual game. This is an RTS, or real-time strategy type of game, so the plot is integrated through the instruction manual, in-game dialogue between characters, cinematic cutscenes, and briefings before each mission. I love how each race has a different skin on their briefing rooms. Ugh, so cool. Since missions can take anywhere from 15 minutes to hours to complete, the story tends to become secondary, with the strategies and tactics stealing the focus. Still, the connection between each race and their goal is clear, especially when it comes to how the player fits into the world. In each campaign, you play as an unnamed senior military official within that race, though you're simply an observer as the story unfolds. Like any space opera, the story has a lot of nuance to keep things interesting. For example, you'd think that once the Terran learn that 1, they're not alone in the universe, and 2, some of the alien races they've encountered are actually quite hostile, they'd put aside their differences and band together. Of course, that isn't the case, and we get to see the political and military ploys unfold through each act. These come through in B, C, and D plot lines in each campaign, giving the player enough information to care about the characters on the missions. There's even a love story between 2 prominent characters, Sarah Kerrigan and Jim Raynor, which ends up spanning the whole series and has higher stakes than a simple will they, won't they trope. In fact, their romance is a driving force in many of the plot lines and makes a lot of the major story points realistic. The interracial conflicts play out well too, as the player gets to see how even the hive-minded Zerg have interpersonal quarrels and question authority. And, once we get to play as Protoss, we learn that even the most advanced species makes mistakes and must atone for past transgressions. Of course, it's not perfect. Given that the main draw is the real-time strategy game and online battles, much of the story is rushed and the major plot points are given as simple sentences during a briefing. A lot of the initial focus is on the Zerg trying to assimilate the Terrans, with splashes of Protoss trying to quell the insectoid advancements. But, as we switch to the Zerg campaign, we learn that there's a lot of history between the alien races, and the transition between the human conflict and the greater war isn't very smooth. One major flaw is the biggest win for the Zerg against the Protoss happens off camera, and is almost a blink and you miss it piece of dialogue during a mission briefing. When seeing this in the bigger picture of the game series, it's not that big of a deal, but thinking back to 1998 when a sequel wasn't guaranteed, this is a pretty big oversight. It could have at least been a cinematic, which would have really strengthened the tension between the Zerg and the Protoss and combined exposition with a cool cutscene. On the whole, while this wasn't a particularly unique plot, the combination of character development and consistent infrastructure help it find an interesting intersection between story and gameplay. It falls somewhere between hard and soft sci-fi, with the story focusing more on the relationships and societal commentary, while the game relies on the technology and scientific accuracy. Well, sorta. They skirt past lots of logic, but there's a hierarchy and natural order to creating structures and soldiers in the game that I would say is grounded in the harder sciences. And I'll give the game designer props for keeping the interface and infantry units similar through each campaign, while the narrative designers throw in fun Easter eggs and sci-fi references. Now I know this game is almost 30 years old, but given that Blizzard just remastered it in 2017, I think it's a fun twist on a space opera sci-fi adventure. Though the learning curve can be steep at times and the missions can get repetitive, there are ways around the more challenging aspects of the game. The Queen of Blades storyline is still one of my favorites, and I loved that a female character was given such a chaotic character arc. Back in the day, it was rare to see women revered in any genre, and you know a character is worthwhile if Dwight dresses up like them for Halloween. It's always fun to see when fans of video games clamor for more of the story, and StarCraft definitely had a following. So while you might be inclined to dismiss this relic as a vehicle for esports and overly sexualized cosplaying, just remember the roots of the series and know there's a greater story here. Unlike most space operas, you get to be involved in the series, learning bits and pieces of a new world while also balancing a high stakes, complicated version of chess. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!